BWI Daily Edition coming to you today. It is State of the Program Part 2. That's what I'm calling it, Nate. Because yesterday we got James Franklin's comments on a wide variety of topics that included a lot of stuff that had absolutely nothing to do with National Signing Day, which on Wednesday that was the case, and Penn State got 2 new recruits. The T. Frank's Film Room is probably up if you're watching this on YouTube. It's probably up right now, so you can check that out on Blue White Illustrated's YouTube channel. If you're listening to the podcast, you can check it out on Blue White Illustrated's YouTube channel. And if you're a member, you get that early access for T. Frank's Film Room on the site first. Great reason to sign up for $1. Link is in the description. Nate, I've been yammering on. How you doing?
I'm great. I cannot get over the new music. I'm gonna get used to it, but it's really throwing me off. Is there gonna be a new
eventually
card?
Eventually. So, a little peek behind the scenes, a little behind the curtain stuff. I may have said this before on the channel, like everything you see on the screen is something that I've made in some way. Other, parts and pieces, and when you do this stuff, you have a bunch of things you're working with it's like a salad to make a salad, right? So when I find new things that I like, I introduce them into the show. And one of the things that I've gotten access to through our parent company, Adobe, like all of it. And as much as I'm a kid in a candy store, I'm not going to just throw crap up there. So once I get my legs under me how to make things a little bit better, then we'll be getting some new intros and some transitions and some things like that. You'll see it here and there. It's going to start growing and developing, but not ready to change the intro just yet because I haven't found anything yet that I like.
You should have popped some video of Micah Shrewsbury at the game the other night, the basketball game. That should be the next step.
That was, it was on my mind.
Some video footage. That'd be great.
It was on my mind, and I was there with a mission. I needed to get X, Y, and Z. I had the edict on high from our senior editor of here's what we need at the basketball game. So I went with my trusty camera I'm looking into right now and shot a bunch of photos of the basketball team. So I'm a man of many talents, but one of them is not time travel to be in 2 places at once.
Stop. Just do it all. You'll be fine.
You are correct. I will be fine. I'll be able to do it. We're talking about Penn State and the future of college football today. A really big brain, galaxy brain meta discussion with Nate Bauer about where college football is headed and Penn State's role in that environment. So we heard James Franklin speak yesterday on a number of issues, and we covered a bunch of them yesterday. And we actually talked about some football with some new recruits and the players and questions about Sean Clifford. So if you want to check that out, it's, of course, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. You can check out the article there, the podcast, or again, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel, and you can see it there on the Daily Edition feed. We're going to go part 2 here, some of the deeper topics we didn't have time to cover. And one of them is what Nate was basically describing as James Franklin's elevator pitch yesterday as far as what the program needs to be. Is that a fair way to put it?
Yeah, I think so, because it was a response to many different questions.
Yeah.
Right? The questions don't actually have to be interrelated for him to feel as though there is a certain characteristic and a certain approach that needs to be taken to compete in this environment.
And this is what he said about that.
I think we have to be bold and aggressive. I think we have to sit here and say, okay, here's a rule that's coming. That's going to be a change. And how are we going to take advantage of that rule under the Penn State umbrella that everybody is comfortable with and have thorough discussions about it? And then the same thing under the state rules and laws. And then once we do that, which we should be able to do very quickly, then we need to move, and we need to be one of the leaders in college football. We need to be one of the leaders in college athletics, and put some things out there that people can be excited about and that people can get behind, and that put our student athletes in the best position and put our individual teams in the best position to be successful and compete year round?
There's a lot to unpack there, but I guess the first place to start is, how do you go from not leading and being behind to then being the leader, being out in front of these things? How do you get to that point, Nate?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know that it is something that happens overnight, but certainly I think it's something that can happen through a variety of decisions that are made over a course of time. Look, like you're even seeing right now the first kind of implications of NIL on the college football landscape, right? Jimbo Fisher's rant on Wednesday about how NIL had nothing to do with it, right? Like the very fact that that was a rant, even though he's ranting against its existence, means it exists, right? Like it. I understand what he's saying, and I'm not in no position to argue whether or not NIL has a huge influence on Texas A&M, but or its recruiting class. But the point remains, it is the conversation. It is what everyone is talking about right now. And so one thing that I saw on Wednesday night that I thought was super interesting, Southern Cal football on its website is selling Caleb Williams autographed helmets and footballs.
Already.
He hasn't played a game.
Yeah.
He hasn't played a game for them. But my point is that's through their infrastructure.
Yeah.
So Southern Cal has made a decision. And again, I mean, as James Franklin mentioned there, it's not an aside. It is a huge piece of this to create your plan within the construct that exists. Whatever those rules are, whatever Pennsylvania's rules are, whatever Penn State as a university is doing, whatever the athletic department as a whole is doing, those things are all important. But take the things that you can control and then maximize them. I mean, I think that is essentially his message, and it is absolutely necessary to start down that road as quickly as you can do it within the space that you have.
I always try to memorize what I'm going to say before I come on camera, but what you said and Jimbo Fisher just jarred something in my memory, and I want to go read this. Normally I make it look so easy, don't I, Nate? It's all memorized. Okay. This is from SI.com. I want to see, one second, I got to block a pop-up here. This is via the Associated Press. Every Texas Longhorn offensive lineman on scholarship will get $50,000 annually for the use of their name, image, and likeness to support charitable causes, a new nonprofit entity announced on Monday. Do you know who Charles Bauer, On3 recruiting ranking director, had as the #1 offensive line class in 2022? Texas.
Hawaii.
Yes, all the big guys want to go eat pig in Hawaii and do luau's and live in that. And yes, no, it was Texas. So yes, it's having an effect. It absolutely is having an effect. 1 = 2. And like, I don't want to hear that it didn't have an effect, because it did. So Penn State is not in this area. They are not in this environment yet. And I always ask you these things because I'll go back to our conversation about facilities, and you said it's not like you have to have them lined up in a list, a honey-do list. Multiple things can happen at the same time, but I'm going to ask you it this way again. If there's an actionable item here right now that Penn State could take in the next 3 months to advance the ball, start the clock on this, where do you start? What's the easiest avenue of entry for Penn State to be competitive on this level?
Personnel, I think, is probably it's a higher or 3 or 7. I'm not exactly sure how broad it needs to be. I thought Mike Gross asked a good question on Wednesday about putting a finer point on what are the specifics that James Franklin wants. That's kind of the thing that is happening right now with James Franklin is he he talks in broad terms about what's necessary without ever really specifying what those things are.
Yep.
Okay. And I get it. If it comes across as insubordinate, right? Because these are things that maybe he has requested that have not been approved or have been denied, then certainly you would understand his hesitation in bluntly saying, "Oh, I want a staff of 5 to handle NIL in the Lash building,
right?
24 hours a day, 365, right?" So if that hasn't happened, okay, fine. He can't go to those specifics, but I think that's what he's alluding to.
Yeah,
I think that that's part of what he's alluding to is, look, just look around, look at what everybody else is doing and what exists within the framework that you can do immediately. And I do think that that's one of those things is, hey, Penn State needs someone in-house. Like, it should actually be a bonus. It should be something that Penn State is proud of, having a liaison that can weed out some of the untoward actors that are out there.
Right.
Like to help in that process, to help these kids and to help their parents. Cause it's not about Sean Clifford. It's about his parents. It's about the support structure around him. It's not about Nick Singleton.
No one's born with a business degree. You may have an inclination towards understanding the subtleties of business, and that may lead you into a career that way, but no one's born with business nets to go get their own NIL deal. And that is a part of, I think that is an easy entry into Penn State's commitment to educating players, right? I mean, we want to educate players and let them understand how to business and finance and all of those lofty goals of not only get the money, but make the money work for you. Like, getting the money is also part of it in business, is it not? It's the main part of it.
Very much so. Very much. And I think that is happening at a lot of other schools that would be very simple for Penn State to implement, because James Franklin can't be the guidance on something like this.
Right.
Right. Jaywan Sider can't be all of the assistant coach. Like, there. And again, like, this is something that he talked about yesterday, but I'm going to focus it a little bit. There's so much happening.
Yeah.
His job, James Franklin's job, should be to coach football and maybe raise some money, right?
We're so far beyond that at this point, right?
I get it, but the same deal for Sean Clifford. His job should be to play football, and he talked about it during the season. He talked about some of the NIL endeavors that he had.
Yep.
He signed autographs, and he has a deal with McClanahan's, and those are good things. He had really very little to do with it. It's, hey, Sean, show up at this time and smile and wave and sign a few autographs, and it's done. That is something that Penn State can help with.
Here's where it gets murky. Here's where it gets murky, and this is kind of what we're talking about, is the people that do that are agents, right? And if you're an 18-year-old who's guaranteed zero money but has potential to make money, how do you invest in an agent? How do you know who's a good agent? How do you even, I think in the NFL, there's a clearinghouse where you have to be certified. So how do you manage all of that at the NCAA level? And how do universities, and I think the wrong word is control, because that makes it sound like then the university is dictating things. But educate, let's go back to that word that's less inflammatory. How do you educate these players to make good decisions with their name, image, and likeness, and make it so they're not being taken advantage of?
I mean, I do think that that's already happening in terms of what they have in place. That was the whole point, is, hey, you can stay above the fray as an institution and as a university while still giving these guys and young women the opportunity to learn about what this landscape looks like.
Yeah.
But I just think that there's a massive difference between, hey, here is what this landscape looks like, versus, hey, I can help you navigate it. I can help you actually, like, hey,
so that's the next step. That's the step further from just having the information to then making the information actionable for these kids or acting on it for them?
Yeah, I mean, of many. It doesn't have to be that. If there are restrictions at Penn State that prevent that, then maybe it's something else, right? Maybe it is. We talked about it the other day, the collective. Maybe it's a thing where a group of wealthy Penn State donors, alums, what have you, get together, organize, and have for lack of a better word, a slush fund that can start to facilitate some of these deals. I feel, I'm giving James Franklin a problem for not being specific, but in that sense, he's kind of right? Like it's not about this, hey, we have to do this one thing. It's, hey, there are 25 different options.
Use your imagination.
Use your imagination.
Yeah.
Figure it out.
Yeah.
Figure it out. And the people who are best suited to figure it out need to get together and do that.
So this would be a great time to be at the Smeal College of Business as a student. Like, it sounds like anybody with an idea can come in here and affect this area for Penn State football. I don't know how that would work because I don't have those. My ideas and my imaginative ideas you see here on screen. I'm not the business deal guy. But somebody out there is, and that's the point for all of these things that you're seeing across the country is like $50,000. The game's won in the trenches, Nate. The game is won in the trenches. And I heard Texas people, fans and commentators talk about how the biggest difference between Texas in the mid-2000s and now is the offensive line. So somebody went out and did something about it. And they get $50,000. So, use your imagination, I guess is the point. The next thing is... And you brought up the collective, and this is something that people keep saying, largest alumni association in the world for Penn State.
Yep.
And my brain is pretty literal, A to B sometimes. The Alumni Association actively raises funds. So if USC can actively sell helmets with autographs, can the largest alumni base in the world actively raise funds for the football program? If we're just making stuff up, every Penn State grad got that call at some point. And my ex-girlfriend from college made those calls at the call center. So, there is an infrastructure in place to raise donations. I don't know if you're allowed. Is it legal? I'm asking questions I don't know the answer to, which I normally don't do. But, is that legal?
Yeah, I'm not. I mean, at Penn State, probably not.
Right.
At Penn State, that's not something that would happen, but that doesn't mean that. Again, the basic tenet notion to understand, and that I think James Franklin is trying to push right now, and I tend to agree with it, is look, the rules that are written, whatever, those fine, but figure out a new path, figure out what you can do, and then go at it really, really hard. Do as much as you possibly can within what you are permitted to do. And then while that's happening, if you need to lobby to adjust some things and have rules rewritten, I mean, you're looking at it right now. This is national news. Alabama's state legislator is going to redo, or has already redone, its NIL law. Right? So it's law from July.
Yeah.
It's going to redo that. So this is not conspiratorial. It's not something that I'm trying to turn into something that it's not. Penn State football matters to a ton of businesses and people. Its success and being able to create it and sustain it is incredibly important, certainly to this community, and in a lot of ways, the state.
Yeah.
If it's in the interest of the state to change laws for Penn State to be able to better compete in this realm, it should do that.
Yeah.
That should be happening. Those conversations should be had right now, and those things should pass through the legislator.
Do you think quickly, because we brought up USC, USC is in one of the largest states in the union, right? Massive geological, it's a huge state that covers multiple different areas, multiple different cities, multiple different ethnicities. It's everything of the West Coast, right? It is so diverse. Pennsylvania is very much different. So if USC has LA, is that an advantage that Penn State is in position to have Pennsylvania? Like I'm again thinking out loud, asking questions in real time. Like, is that an advantage or is that a disadvantage? Because I think we talk about this with State College in mind of the specific businesses, but we're talking about the state level. Is there the influence there, and is that a value to? You get what I'm saying? Like, there's a difference there to be had, or is it not? That's not the point.
I mean, USC is a private school. Like it's about having influence. And
True.
And if that's what you're asking is whether or not Penn State has that influence, I don't know if it does. I don't know if it's something that Penn State has sought. And that's we were talking about this before the show. That's where the new president at Penn State comes into play is, hey, what's her influence? What are the relationships? What needs to happen to open doors? And then again, while those doors are being opened, while that process is because here's the thing is all these states are going to follow each other. Yeah. And if they don't follow each other, they're going to find themselves and their universities and their athletic programs quickly becoming irrelevant. So if there is a blueprint that's out there, and you saw it this summer when there were 3 or 4, 7 states maybe that had passed laws. I mean, it happened overnight.
Yep.
It was like, oh, June 30th, boop.
Go back to sports betting. Once the dam broke at sports betting, it was, almost all states now. There are going to be some holdouts that are always going to be holdouts, but like most states now, sports betting is legal. And here I am. Yesterday we're talking about like things that interest me, and like here I am thinking of solutions and thinking of things because that's how my brain works talking about these topics. So appreciate you following me down the rabbit hole on some specific random things that came into my brain, Nate. I know I'm taking you by the
It's big.
I want to put a fine point on this. Going back to, as you mentioned, James Franklin's comments yesterday about the president of Penn State and the new one coming in, and Eric Barron leaving. Because this is going to kind of wrap up and really frame where Penn State is if you haven't checked out the full press conference from James Franklin. Here he is speaking about the new president and NIL.
With name, image, and likeness, this is something that we've been pushing on and talking about for 2 years. In the football building, this was brought up 2 years ago, that we needed to have a plan and be aggressive and be bold with this area. Compared to the programs that you have mentioned, we're not there yet. I do think we have an unbelievable opportunity at Penn State with our alumni base and our brand and our national reputation. I think we have tremendous opportunities, with the education, that our young men get and the foundation that our men and women leave Penn State with, and the number of really, really successful alumni that we have. We have to take advantage of that, and we have to be bold, and we have to be aggressive, and we have to embrace it. I'd love to see us being on the front end and being the leader nationally in these areas, but we're not there yet. That's clear and that's obvious. We have some work to do, but yeah, I'd love to see us like the schools that you mentioned. That we are bold and aggressive in these areas and flexible. And when these new rules are put in place, we have to move, and we have to move quickly. There's no doubt about it. When it comes to conversations with our new president, I think the first thing is our new president has been very, very respectful of President Barron and make sure that transition is smooth. And obviously we have a ton of respect for Coach Barron and what he's been able to do in our time. We came pretty much together to Penn State. So I haven't had a sit down conversation with our new president yet. We've had some conversations, but not, in the details that you're talking about. I know that's going to happen.
So I think that kind of puts into context where Penn State as a university sits at this point. And I know that was a bit of a longer clip, but I think it covered a lot of what we're talking about and framed it pretty well, that Penn State, James Franklin and the new president haven't even sat down to really have a talk about all of this stuff to make any of my great ideas I've suggested actionable, or some of the ones that are out there. So is that something, do you think that's a legitimate barrier that might, the wheel might get greased here soon for Penn State once that transition is complete?
Yeah, I think once the transition is complete, and I think that's what he said. I mean, I don't think that there's any real mystery to that, is that Eric Barron is still outgoing. And so there's kind of this respectful transition of power. Obviously, it's not like that serious.
It's not the president of the United States, the president of the university.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so, there's this transition. But I mean, I think that the word that he used yesterday was alignment, right? Is that he believes that it is as close as it's been in his time at Penn State. So that's 8 full years now, where the board of trustees and its director, the president of the university, the athletic director and football coach, and all of the mechanisms in between, right, have the best opportunity at all pulling the rope in the same direction. And so if that's the case, I mean, I don't know about you, but like I got, my sense was twofold yesterday. One, they're not where they need to be. Two, but they could get there. It's not impossible. There's no barrier that would prevent this from going forward. And so I think that's there, there was a little bit of excitement behind some of those words about what the actual possibilities are. They just have to open the door. And walk through it.
Just because I absolutely know, and I'm just asking you for our listeners, and I totally know the answer to this question. Do you know when Neely Benabuti takes over as president of the university? Is it this spring?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm glad you said the spring, because anywhere between March 20th
and like May 5th,
June 20th.
I was imagining that Eric Barron graduates. Like he's going to walk across with his cap and gown finally. It's been probably 40 years of his life, but finally he's graduating from college. So
I don't think it's imminent. I don't think that it's like next week, but I could be wrong.
Okay, so let's get on to our next topic. This is obviously a very heavy non-football topic, but ultimately these conversations affect what happens on the field. From players coming into the university to the university standing in college football and their influence and all that stuff. It is about what happens on the field, and that is the fun part, and that's the part that we always want to really focus on. But it is the off season when all these big things happen. So if it has not been to your taste, appreciate you coming to the BWI Daily Edition. I'm your host, Thomas Frank Carr. We're now going to answer
I'm sorry.
questions. You're sorry?
Yeah. If it's not enough, when are they going to commit to the running game?
We'll get to some of that. But I enjoy these conversations, and I feel like these are interesting as long as you're open to the ideas and to the topics. But if you're the fan that says it wasn't this way in my day, and it was, all of these things, like I interact with people like that on a regular basis, in person, friends, family members, and it's not going to get better. And I know we've kind of said this already, Nate, but like there's no going back. So hopefully for the fans out there that don't like this stuff, like maybe you just don't have to pay attention to it, but it is a factor when it comes to 4th and 2. And do you have an offensive line?
Do you care about how the Patriots were built as a franchise?
Personally?
Or do you care? No. I'm just saying,
okay. Because lies and cheating is the answer to how they were built, but go ahead.
But that's interesting. That is, right? Like, here's how you do it. It's not by lies and cheating to get the best players. It's lies and cheating to get the best liars and cheaters. I mean,
Yeah.
it's great.
To get the best video evidence of what's going to happen next. All right. I teased it enough. I want to get to the mailbag and answer people's questions. Here we go. BWI Mailbag. We're going to be doing this every Thursday. I told you the new stuff was coming here on the BWI Daily Edition. This is our new mailbag segment we're doing every Thursday on the show. So make sure you submit your questions. If you are, this is where it's the advantage is being a member of BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, because I put a message board post out Wednesday night. You can ask me the questions there, and even if I don't get to them on the show, I will answer them on the message board. So you will get your questions answered each week, as long as it's not something like, let's just start with this one, because Larry from Twitter has to ask his question. Larry Barberio, what's the difference between a tiger and a giraffe? And that's the best way to get to me on Twitter, at Thomas Frank Carr, to get your question. This is our nature segment, Nate, where we explain to kids that a tiger is a carnivore and a giraffe is an herbivore. And that's how nature works. If you want more information, ask your parents. So there you go. First one out. You ready for some football questions, Nate?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it.
All right. Beaverman72 asks, and this is our anthropomorphic Beaverman on Twitter, one of our friends. Would you attribute the lack of success the past 2 seasons to recruiting, in-game coaching, or lack of player development? And he knows your tricks, Nate. He says, if you say it's all of it, you do have to pick one in the question. Would you like me to go first? Or
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So it also helps that I read these and I put them into the thing. So I'll give you a minute to think. I would have to say, if there's one thing, it would be recruiting. I haven't looked at a lot of guys on the field, and I hate to do this again. Let's look at the offensive line specifically. I would look at those guys, and I would say, which one of these guys is underperforming, and which one of these guys is performing to the level you might expect of that player. Of those 5 players, I could make a case that one was being underperforming from what we expect, and you could go to coaching on that. And you could also make a case that it's not coaching, it's a bunch of other things. So to me, the talent, and this is where when people give me the cliche, and I hate cliches of James Franklin, great recruiter, can't coach, it's like, well, James Franklin, the recruiter, in a large, broad sense, this is a broad sense show, hasn't gotten the players for James Franklin, the coach, over the last couple of years. A dip in recruiting led to a dip in production, and I think that's pretty clear. But I would also say that they have bounced back pretty well in the last 2 classes. So that would be my answer. What is your thought here, Nate?
I reject the question.
Of course
I'm
you do.
I'm going to answer it, but I reject it. And I reject it because does Micah Parsons not count? If Micah Parsons plays in 2020, do you think that the results are different in some of the outcome of those games? Yes or no?
Oh, certainly.
Okay. So an all-pro NFL in his rookie season, we're going to say that had an impact, right?
Yeah.
We're going to say that Journey Brown having a career-ending medical condition had an impact. The ability, it frustrates me because I tend to try to be as fair as I can be and just see what the picture is, right? Just broaden the field of vision as much as you can and just see things for what they are. And to me, the most frustrating element of any of this is glossing over things like that as though, well, they're just 2 players. It's just COVID. Everybody else played with COVID. Yeah, and everybody else had weird, bad seasons because of it.
Yeah.
So no, I cannot. I'm not going to say. That
let me rephrase it. Let me rephrase the question then, because in my answer, I was only specifically talking about 2021. That to me, I'm with you on that.
2 years.
I understand. What my answer was specifically tailored towards last season, because I agree with you about 2020. I'm in the same boat about that. I'm not in this equation holding one thing or the other against the coaching staff. 2021 is a different animal. That was a full season. That was a regular season. where, yes, there are still some effects, but, for everything from like they're lifting together, we're going to practice, and they're practicing on a normal schedule. And they were 5-0 at one point, and then things tailed off at the end of the season because they did not have as many ways to win, because the personnel, in my opinion, dictated that they could not run the ball or execute certain schemes. So when I evaluate that, I see that as talent in this equation. So I'm giving you the option here to just talk about 2021, and Beaverman is going to get his answer in this way, whether he likes it or not.
Okay. 2021,
yes.
It was all of it.
We're moving on.
No. Look, okay. Recruiting. Recruiting with a major asterisk, because, again, I mean, I just think that there were so many things that happened. Do I think that specific play calls were what differentiated Penn State from winning 10 games versus 7 this season? No, I don't.
Right.
Maybe 1, right? Like, I mean,
I would agree with
that. If any of 9 overtimes work differently, maybe you're talking about an 8-win season. I'm not sure. I'm just saying that it's not this marked change. Whereas the recruiting side of things, specific to a quarterback, a defensive tackle, those two probably being the primary ones, being injured and not really having a way to facilitate a replacement. Yeah. Okay, you can put that on recruiting. Fine.
Right. So,
I'll go with it.
Let's go a layer deeper in this question and be as fair as possible. That Penn State can recruit good players that maybe aren't stars, but are good football players. I'll give you an example of a guy that would have helped this year would be Judge Culpepper. Like, just having the option, having a veteran defensive tackle so you don't have to put Keziah Izzard and Devon Ellies on the field together. Having a player like that doesn't go to a MAC school so they can play and they can start, in this situation, that would be what you would normally have. That, because of the transfer portal, does not exist anymore. So injuries, bad luck, things like that have an absolute effect. And we've gone 17 rounds about the quarterback and Taquan Roberson and not having Will Levis. So that's also a part of this when it comes to recruiting, is maybe even in my sense being unfair about the fact that they didn't have a backup quarterback. Well, they did, and then the transfer portal happened. So this might be the new future. Who knows? But I guess to answer the question initially, I didn't feel like they had the depth of talent to overcome situations or to create environments in which they could win more games more easily as well. In games that they should have won easily or close games, there was the attrition that led to them losing. And to me, it comes down to the players on the football field. Let's move on.
I'm with you.
Let's go to Scott. Scott says, and this is back to our conversation, I believe, yesterday about making the transfer portal and early enrollees and things more equitable. Scott, at Scott Cavadad. That's a lot of A's and D's together, man. Scott says, would it be possible to make only players who enroll in January eligible for this early signing period? Good or bad idea? Trying to limit it to one area so guys can't unenroll and re-enroll and have this kind of like inequitable distribution of the transfer portal across college sports.
I'm not sure that I follow. The problem with the early signing period is that it like ruins the calendar, I think. So I'm not sure. I don't know that needs to be limited to just a certain group of people, because it continues that trend, right? You're still having 2 signing days. And in fact, if anything, it probably makes it worse, because now you're dividing into 2 different sprints, right? Like, as it stands, you're trying to close the class of 2022 entirely at Penn State in December so that you can move ahead and put all of your energies and focus into the class of 2023. If you split that signing day up, now you're having to do both. Like now you're having to juggle 2023, 24, 25 with still finishing out and all of the havoc that goes with that, the class of 2022. So I'm not sure that's, I don't know. Ryan's probably better for that question.
Certainly.
What do you think?
I took this as the transfer portal, so I may have misunderstood the question as far as early signing period and enrolling in January, because there's two groups of players that enroll in January. There's the recruits, and then there's the transfers. So, but what we're getting down to is players that get into the program in the winter and are there for spring ball, whether it's freshmen or it's transfers. And my answer would be, if you just allowed it to be one specific time, one entry and exit point, instead of being as open as it is, then I think that would have... It may have a negative effect on players who don't get picked up initially, but at least it would make things tidier. I think it would make things tidier if early enrollees or transfers had a 60-day window to get into the program, or a 30-day window. And it doesn't have to be December to January. It can be January through whenever, but then that goes into the academic calendar and school and all that. And that is obviously the sticking point.
Yeah, and I think that was something that James Franklin talked about on Wednesday, that should not be an inhibitor to your success as a football program, is the fact that a different university has a different academic calendar than you, and so they can accept players into their program to the point where maybe some of these guys just immediately wrote off Penn State as, hey, it's kind of a non-starter. Your classes start on whatever, the second Monday in January, whereas school X starts in the end of January. And so it gives me more time. I can consider my options and go from there. Like I would say that some type of structure, you're right, for the transfer portal, 2 waves, I'm fine with it. Spring, post spring practice, and post season. So like the beginning of December to January, the beginning of January, and then the same for the spring, right? May to June.
Because right now what we have is we have announcements that happen all the time from the end of the season through, whenever, question mark. Guys are announcing that they're going into the portal whenever, even if that reality and that fact has been the case since the end of the season. So I don't know. This is the problem. This is really the problem of having vestiges of the amateurism model and the university model coupled with a more and more professional-looking approach to these things with transfers and NIL and all this stuff, is that we're mixing oil and water, and it's not going smoothly. Okay, next question. Let's get to Chris, who says, can you change the music to the intro back, please? Chris, you might be the only person who's enjoyed the old intro music to the show. You and me are the only people that probably liked that.
I liked it. I like the new one, but I like the old one.
So here's the thing, and I'll be real with you. There's only so much royalty-free music I have to choose from, so the old song isn't going anywhere. I mean, it's right here. I can play it for you now if you want, Chris. There you go. We'll use it in different areas, but I've overwhelming response to the new intro music, which has been the story. Forget the early signing, the traditional signing period. The music to the show has been the topic of conversation this week. Let's get to our last actual question. Numerous people, including myself, mention the good and the bad of how Penn State, and this is from Youth, by the way. I don't know if it's Juf. This is one of our message board members. I always like to make these fun. So Youth asks, numerous people, including myself, mentioned the good and the bad about how Penn State cross-trains players at multiple positions. Can you explain how they tend to do that? I'm wondering if cross-training players across the board or only in certain situations. I've seen them try to get the best on the field, including the offensive line, maybe the best 3 linebackers. Areas of need, they are buried on the depth chart, including, and he gives examples there. What is your view of how Penn State cross-trains players at positions where you can do that, because there is a split on whether that's a good idea or a bad idea. So what's your opinion on, should you have a guy just do what he's good at or have the flexibility to play multiple positions?
Yeah, just so I follow, what's the bad?
That guys
what's
are
the argument?
So that a guy is either playing out of position because he's the best possible option, saying that you're putting a guy at Will that is better at Sam, or the vice versa, or a guy playing tackle who should be a guard. And you're cross-training Landon Tangwall at 5 positions when you should just be focusing on making him whatever position he's best and accelerating the clock on him being excellent there. So that would be the argument against cross-training.
Yeah, you can't do that.
Right.
You can't take that approach of specialization. I mean, I guess it's obviously quarterback, right?
Right.
Maybe kicker. But no, you in college football, you can't do that. There's no free agency. So you can't just go out and pick up what you need at a moment's notice if something goes poorly. I think that you have to take the approach that, and again, I mean, this is for a bunch of positions. It's not for every position, and it's certainly not for every guy. There are players who are limited, demonstrate that they're limited. They have one specific thing that they're good at, and that's the position that they stick at. But there's still other needs on the team. And if a player can serve and help serve those needs, you have to take advantage of that, because your object is to win games. So I think that yes, they tend to, by the time they are seniors, put players into seniors, juniors, put players into the position that they're going to be to have success at the next level, if that's a factor. But other than that, you've got to construct your team and make the best and give yourself the best opportunity to win from what you got.
Yeah. So part of his question that I eliminated here was going on to ask about Jesse Luketa and cross-training him at defensive end and linebacker. And another part of this conversation, I'm going with the Swedish pronunciation, is that the players self-determine. And as Nate said, like, Penn State will push them to what they think is the best position for them ultimately, whether it's in the NFL or just their best possible scenario as a football player. But players get to decide where they want to play. Maybe a little bit of a charged example, but Lamont Wade was a guy that got to decide where he wanted to play. They generally let guys play corner if they want to play corner, and then they go from there. And they cross-train to the field safety and all of those things. So that's a part of it as well, is giving players the agency to be the best player they can be. And that's why a lot of players love coming to Penn State, and that's what sells them on coming to Penn State, is that they're not boxed into a decision. And then if it doesn't work, then they have more conversations about that. And Nate is right that, like, you can't afford to find out in week 5 that your tackle's injured and we don't have another guy who's ever taken a snap at tackle. Going back to the offensive line, this is what this is about. This is the conversation. It's always about the offensive line. You can't afford to do that, because it's a rare instance where you have a guy like Ryan Bates on the roster who, he played all 5 positions. He played some at center. They put him at guard, but they knew he could play tackle if he needed to, because they saw him at that position. They gave him some reps there, and that allowed him to move there and then not move again for like the rest of his career. So, I think that this is, again, captured in the moment. Like, you're a hostage of the moment, that it has not gone well. But I think it goes back to, again, the first question from Beaverman, who I hope is staying warm and dry out there in his beaver den with his TV. It's about the personnel. Like, if you don't have the guys that are flexible to actually play the tackle in the guard position, and you're stretching it because you have to, that's the conversation we're having. Not, is it a good idea to cross train? That, I think, is missing the point.
Yeah, I tend to think that a big part of the mission at this level is preparing yourself for all possibilities. And so you are trying to construct your team in a way that you're not ruined when injuries happen, because guess what? Nobody knows it better than Penn State over the last few years. Injuries are going to happen. So what are you going to do when that does happen? He brought up Marquise Wilson, Keandre Lambert-Smith and Parker Washington go down.
Yeah. Penn State did not have another slot receiver last year. They were lucky that Parker Washington was healthy.
What happens? That's, whereas you have a handful of corners, more than a handful of corners, who this guy plays this, he plays this, we can move this piece around, whatever. Like, you can sustain a couple of losses. Whereas, Marquise can step in, and even though it's early in the process of him learning the position, he can step in and maybe help. And he did help. Right. There were some moments. He had some occasions. I think that those things are it has to be the approach. I don't have a gauge of what everybody else does, but I would assume it's pretty standard practice at this level to do that.
Plenty of guys in the best possible scenario start on the interior and then play on the outside. We just had 4 tackles, so we put our best 4 on the field. But they were all 4 tackles. We're not playing guards only on the interior if they're not the best players. It's just about getting the best players to play and play well. This is a tangent and a bit of a rant. I know I've been ranting the last 5 minutes anyway, but I want to wrap up with this because it's a related topic of, you're not succeeding because of X on the football field. Penn State's inside zone isn't working. And the one thing I hear all the time is, well, change the scheme. You need to change the scheme. If that's not working, go to something else. Okay. What are your other options? Penn State actually, amongst the schools that I've watched, runs more variety in their scheme than anyone else. I would make the argument that they need to simplify. They need to run less schemes and get good at those. And that's just from a desperation standpoint. This is not the NFL. You're not coming in expecting professionals to know how to execute every single block technically perfectly and run anything in your playbook. An NFL playbook is literally all the plays that have ever been designed and ever been thought of, and it's just which ones do you lean on more based on your personnel and your preference as an offensive play caller. In college, you've got to decide what you're going to run and what you can run with the most diverse set of players. Meaning, if somebody goes down or we don't get a recruit, what system works the best across the board? It's, in a sense, a lowest common denominator. So if you want to say, okay, change the scheme, you don't have that many to choose from because you've got to practice them to do it and to do it well. So, here's another one. You have an aggressive defensive line. One thing you can use is a trap block where you let them come upfield and you run behind them. Have you ever executed a trap block before? You can't just throw that in the middle of a football game. That's how you get somebody killed. So, it's not that easy. And I guess that's part of the whole conversation is that there are limiting factors unless you're the best team working with the most talent in a system that is loose with the rules so you can practice as much as you want and you can hold shadow practices. I don't know. But I think there are more inhibitors on this stuff than people think.
I just, because I've covered Penn State men's basketball for so long, it's striking to hear you talk about this and how completely opposite the two sports are, in the sense of one is entirely scripted. You better know exactly what you're doing all the time. The other one is, it's not that it's not scripted. It's that there is a framework from which you work from within. That was word salad. But right? Like improv comedy. A buddy of mine does improv.
I do a terrible job of it here on the show.
It's not without rules. That's the thing that people miss, is it's not without rules. There are things that everyone on that stage has agreed to before they embark on the scene, right? And so that is, to me, much closer to basketball and what you're doing in hoops than anything you can possibly do. Like, you cannot improv a football game.
You
like,
get benched possible if you improv too much and you're not a great player. Like, the whole conversation about Micah Parsons was, yeah, he doesn't know what he's doing, but he goes and gets the football anyway. You'll give leeway to that. But he became a phenomenal, elite, all-American player once he learned what he was doing. And now that he's, a professional, he is an all-pro linebacker in his first year because he knows what he's doing and he's not making it up out there. He knows the system. He knows the rules. He knows, and then when you're in that framework, if you're working within that and you are a truly special player, you can then break those rules, but you have to know them to break them. You can't just go out there and do whatever you want. Quarterback has the most leeway to do that, but even as a scrambler, you heard James Franklin talk about the rules of scrambling. Head towards the sideline, work that way with the quarterback, squeeze there, and then throw the ball in a place that the defense can't get. Don't throw it back into the middle of the field. Don't be Patrick Mahomes because you're not Patrick Mahomes. You want to throw the ball accurately down the field? You're not Aaron Rodgers. You can't throw from a crappy platform because you haven't perfected the basics. Like, those are people that have taken the rules like mad scientists and have warped them to their own special skills. We're working with guys that are learning football. So let's lower that and make sure that the basics are executed by these young men. And then when you have a veteran team, you can do more of these things. And I don't know that you're going to get a lot of veteran teams because of the transfer portal.
I've had enough of your preaching for one day.
I wanted to throw some football in here at the end.
Run the Wildcat.
They do with Tyler Warren, and then people got mad at that late in the season because it didn't work either. Oh, we could go all day. But we're not going to. We're done now. I'm your host, Thomas Frank Carr. Make sure you subscribe to the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts. We will talk to you tomorrow.